So I'm a researcher in the web threat space with Symantec. Been through several corporate mergers, so now we're part of Broadcom, which is not relevant to anything. Um, so in thinking about how fun it was to be coming back to SAINTCON after the pandemic, that kind of gave me the idea for the talk. It's like, well, there was some interesting stuff going on in the early days of the pandemic in the web threat space, right? Specifically, if you go back in time, I was at RSA in late February of 2020, and we already had, a health emergency. It had not yet been declared a global pandemic by WHO. That was a couple of weeks later. Some big companies, though, already pulled out. I think AT&T, not to name names or anything, but I think AT&T was one where instead of a big booth on the show floor, they just had an open space. And there were several open spaces among the big sponsors. There were, Asia, for example, is much more used to dealing with respiratory viruses in outbreaks. And so there were a lot of people in China that were already canceling travel, and other Asian countries. Other conferences had canceled already. We'd already seen conferences be canceled. RSA chose to go ahead and got some flack for it. It was interesting thinking back. There were hand sanitizer dispenser machines at the escalators. Stuff. Didn't see many masks, though. San Francisco had declared an emergency, but still let it go ahead. They basically, though, shut down right after that. The next week, everything was shutting down. And it was early enough in the pandemic where we just didn't know how infectious or scary this should be. And so I included the news archive there, where it was early enough that, boy, if out of, say, 20,000 people there, yes, there were 2 confirmed cases that were at RSA, right? And not to make light of this, because one of the Exabeam engineers was a middle-aged guy that was in the hospital in critical care, if I remember, and I honestly don't remember if he pulled through or not, right? So, but you found yourself saying, ooh, did I go by the Exabeam booth? Could I have been in close proximity with one of those people? And you contrast that with months later, it's like, oh yeah, my family's had it, I know everybody's had it, it's everywhere and it's old. So you wouldn't see a big news item like that months later, right? But this is the early days of the pandemic. Well, that was human land, right? Real life. In domain land, where I live, things were also getting crazy. So in early March, so I grabbed I've got several different researchers and vendors slides to pull from, just to say this is not like me saying this is how it was, okay? So Checkpoint had an article, and they said, we've got over 4,000 coronavirus-related domains registered globally since January. This is March 5th, okay, so it's the week after RSA. So 3% of those websites are malicious. That's 50% more likely than other domains registered. So do the math. So 2% of newly registered domains are malicious, but 3% of the coronavirus domains, that's 50% more. Right? So that's marketing speak. I don't like marketing. This is not to call Checkpoint out, because every vendor, including mine, has marketing people that try to make things sound scarier so they can sell more stuff. I hate that. So this is, if you can't read, this is ftc.gov. So this is a government publication focusing on, specifically it says, on how attackers exploit public fear through phishing. So, hey, the attackers are starting to do phishing campaigns themed around coronavirus and COVID. And so they track, the number of domains that they think are corona-related based on the domain name, both in domain names and in TLS certs that are registered, right? And almost everything has a TLS cert these days. And so that looks scary. And this is a government publication saying, hey, there's a lot of phishing going on, so we should worry about it. So there are lots of people worrying about it. This is now a little later. This is mid-April. It was an update of Sophos that they'd done an article in March as well. They'd updated it. So this, I think, is more reflective of what life was like than Checkpoint had, where Sophos says we're seeing 3,000 new domain registrations every day, and over 35,000 so far. And so, that's my favorite picture of how bad and how quickly bad things were getting. But we'll come back by the end of the talk, to like how bad actually was it. Okay, I'm saving that for the end. But the point of this talk comes from a little thing in that other Sophos article where they mentioned that their chief scientist had launched a Slack channel. And I already knew about that because I was in the Slack channel. So I've got a colleague, former colleague, I guess, still friend, Spike, had reached out early in that March timeframe to say, hey, we're getting slammed with Corona and COVID type domains, and everybody's saying, hey, these are bad, and they can't all be bad, but we need help sorting out the good from the bad, right? And you guys are good at that, and so do you want to come aboard and help? And so, yeah, sure. Like, this is a global crisis. Domain man to the rescue. And I'm fortunate enough that I have enough seniority that at the drop of a hat, basically, I can say, yeah, I'm going to focus on this now. This is a cool problem, and it is a problem, so I'm going to help. And I grab one of our senior threat analysts who also likes this stuff, and hey, let's help do this. So we jumped in, and so what this was the cyberthreatcoalition. This is not to be confused with the Cyberthreat Alliance, which already existed at that time. And that's a set of vendors, including Symantec and Sophos and others, who share threat intelligence with each other prior to the release. So when there's a blog or something that comes out and someone's announcing a scary new attack, the members of the CTA have already seen that and had a chance to update their products with whatever threat indicators are in there, whether it's a file hash or a domain or an IP, stuff like that. And that's working. That works well. I don't know how much publicity it gets. I don't know how many people out there are generally aware of the CTA, but they do good work. So the Cyberthreatcoalition, though, was different. This was a Slack channel, and it was open invitation to anybody that wants to come help solve the problem. And so this is what the website looked like back in 2020. And you can't read all of that, but one of the things it's offering is a vetted block list. Okay, so there's two lists. By now, right, there's well over 30, 40, 50,000 COVID, Corona type domain names out there, and with enough people looking at the problem, almost every one of those domains will have somebody saying that it's bad or that it's suspicious. And so the trick is like arriving at some kind of consensus. And so the CTC provided both the open list, like these are everything that anybody has sent in and said might be shady. This is our vetted block list. And so my buddy and I and Spike, we were focused on how do you go from a big list of 30 or 40,000 things that's getting several thousand more things a day that might be shady, down to a list that's reasonable to give to the cowering public to put onto their web filters and firewalls and stuff. So that's what the Cyberthreatcoalition looked like in 2020. This is what it looks like today. A moment of silence for the CTC. It did its job and has and then gone to sleep. So it went very early from the researchers involved telling their other researcher friends, hey, do you want to come help with this problem? But the website mentioned anybody's welcome to join. All comers. We'll find something for you to do, right? And so part of the talk is how do you put together an ad hoc group to tackle a threat space, and what are the lessons you learn? So one good thing about if you get 3,000 people looking at, that's probably, I feel pretty safe in saying, that's probably more people that have ever cared about domain reputation in the history of the World Wide Web. Oops. I don't know is my ear not big enough? No, I got it backwards. There we go. No. Okay. So that's a lot of eyeballs on the problem, and that's also a lot of different approaches and perspective. Those are both good things about something like this. There's also a lot of confusion. As I mentioned, you take any one of the domains that show up on the big list, and there's probably somebody in the coalition saying, yeah, that's shady. And so there's noise to sort through. This was also interesting because this attracted some artificial intelligence, machine learning researchers who said, hey, this looks like a job for ML, right? We've got this big, huge set of things, and we can use our super cool new AI technique to sort through and figure out the bad ones. And the problem is that the vendors are already doing this, okay? And if you come in new to the space, fresh from university, and you've got the machine learning background, but you don't have a background in actually researching websites to decide if they're shady or not, how are you training your system, okay? And so I tend to wonder, right? And we saw problems in the output. And so because this is a HackerCon, we can be snarky. Just because you call something machine learning doesn't mean it's doing anything more sophisticated than pattern matching, okay? So over in Colorado, there is a county, Coronado County, and its website is Corona, right? It's evil. So this is one of the ones that was flagged by one of the machine learning systems that somebody in the CTC said, this is a bad domain. No, it's not a bad domain. It's just accidentally getting lumped in. There was a guy named Francisco, and he's a video producer. And so his website is Francisco Video. Oh, it's COVID! Right? So he got on the list. There were a whole bunch of reputable large organizations from governments, companies, and orgs that created a COVID.subdomain because they wanted a place to gather what's happening with COVID and us. Like this could be a domain for their employees to go to see what the current policies were or how we're keeping our customers safe, right? There's a lot of those. And so those tended to get flagged, all right? And so these are the kinds of problems you have to sort through. All right, so now we're getting to the fun part. So how bad actually was the malware, phishing, et cetera space? So like, how many of these things were actually phishing? So to go back to the one from the government, the FTC, by April, we easily had 40,000 of these domains running around. And if you actually look at the number of unique domains that were actually confidently involved in phishing, it's less than 200. So 200 out of 40,000 is half of 1%. So no, the vast majority of the COVID domains were not doing phishing campaigns. So what was going on then? Well, there was lots of scams. There were a lot of scams going on. Everything from, for $29.99, you can buy the secret military-grade COVID-19 survival manual. How does the military even have a COVID-19 survival manual when it's brand new? Okay, they don't. Spoiler alert, right? But that was one of the sites. There were miracle cures, and we're not talking necessarily the hydroxychloroquine or the horse dewormer ivermectin stuff. I mean, those at least had some non-peer-reviewed study somewhere with a few small people in questionable, but at least one that said it might help, right? And then people would trump it. This is the miracle drug. No, these are like herbal cures, like secret Peruvian herb cures COVID-19. Like, who knew, right? So lots of that kind of stuff. The biggest one, though, were sites selling masks. Right? There was a mask shortage. I had a cool mask that I made out of a t-shirt that had my company logo across. There was like a little YouTube video on how you make a cloth mask out of a t-shirt. That was kind of fun. So if you are a human and you're in the CTC and you want to decide, okay, is this site a scam or not? How do you know? Right? It looks legit. And you got to remember that there were a whole bunch of small manufacturing companies whose business went poof, right? And so they needed something else. And they said, oh, there's a mask shortage. I can retool my facility to make masks. And so there were a whole lot of new mask manufacturers, or they just wanted to do that to be helpful. There were a lot of people who just wanted to help, right? So you couldn't necessarily say, well, this company hasn't been in business. Well, not as a mask manufacturer they haven't, but if you dig a little deeper, it's like, yeah, this is just the site they set up for the mask making stuff, but they've been around for 15 years, right? It's also worth noting that a lot of the West African scammers, these are the guys who do pet scams or romance scams or BEC type stuff, they pivoted, like business opportunity. And so they got into advanced fee, and it wasn't free, and shipment fraud, where they would spin up a professional-looking website, often built by contract in Pakistan, because that's a low-cost area to get websites built. They look really good. Talking about, their long history as a medical device manufacturer. And then there would be like a fake logistics company website. Like, this is who we use for our shipping. And so they would take orders from desperate hospitals for like $1 million worth of whatever and ask for a $100,000, 10%, upfront down payment, and actually say, okay, they give them paperwork showing that it has shipped. And again, they've got this logistics website that also looks professional. That's who's shipping it. So here's your tracking number. Go to that website, right? And that's all fake, right? So that was bad. There was some mal spam, like malicious spam, where you have an attachment that's COVID related in some form, or it's a link to a bad site. But anyway, they were trying to get malware on your computer. Several malware families doing that. There was one, even a single coronavirus ransomware that wasn't really ransomware. It was just a bad guy thought it was a fun name. It was doing something else. So everybody that was involved in the CTC kind of shared this opinion that, yeah, this is worse than normal, right? There is a higher level of bad stuff going on. Why? Like, it's fun to speculate about the reasons. Well, we haven't had a global pandemic on this scale for 100 years. Okay, so that's kind of cool. Not to be facetious, but like, this is history happening right around us. People are somewhere between curious and desperate. We're all shut down, stuck in our homes. And we've got this thing called the internet, which we haven't had during a pandemic before. And so that led to probably the environment where the bad guys were thinking, okay, we can be opportunistic and do some attacking. So, wading through some actual data. So we would get these big lists of tens of thousands of shady domains. Because again, this is somebody saying it's shady. It's not just, here are the new COVID-related domains. These are new domains, and at least somebody says they're shady. So you got to take it seriously. So one day, I actually said, okay, let's do this more or less scientifically rather than just whack through the list. Let's actually keep track of some stats. So this is looking at 2,000 allegedly shady domains from one of the shiny new machine learning systems. So if you look, build this out. So a definite false positive is no. We've already had that in our database, which goes back 20 years. This domain has been in there since before the pandemic. It's got a benign rating, a benign history. This is a false positive. It's not an evil domain. A likely, it was me. It's not in the database, but I think it's probably benign. A true positive is no. We've got this in our database, marked as malicious from a high confidence source, because that's what we do. And then true positive, or the shady, no evidence of benign, often evidence of shadiness. Most of these placeholders. So if you're doing a machine learning system, okay, and you look at the false positives, 26, and your true positives of 30, you said this is a crappy machine learning system, because I'm basically flipping a coin as to whether a site is truly malicious or truly benign, right? Now, if you go to the shady chunk, the vast majority of the list, all right, then you can give the machine learning system a little more credit because, okay, that's not a malicious domain yet. It could be, right? It could become malicious in the future, but currently it's not. It's a placeholder. It's a part domain. There was a ton of domain speculating going on, right? People registering a domain hoping they could sell it later to somebody. But if there's 100,000 COVID-type domain names, what are the odds that anybody actually got rich selling one of those, right? That's hard to do. So there's no harm blocking the shady ones. There's no benign content there in our judgment. So you're not missing out on anything. If you look at that as the ratio, then, hey, the machine learning system's not doing too bad. 26 false positives out of 2,000 is not good, not great, but it's okay, right? So then there were some that were left. There were a few leftovers that were not in our database yet, and so we used our dynamic analysis system. And so those 149 broke down like this. Again, 30 probably shady, maybe shady, 52 probably benign, like fairly strong negative vote, weaker negative vote, neutral mixed votes, probably benign, weak positive. Of those, 15 of the 52 is a strong enough benign vote that it's probably a false positive. So you throw those on the false positives and false negatives. It's still a decent machine learning system for a first go for whoever built that. All right, the last thing I wanted to do as I was getting this talk together is I thought, ooh, I haven't heard anything about monkeypox. I mean, I've heard about monkeypox, but in terms of the web threat space, in the domain space, I haven't heard anybody saying that we've got an epidemic of phishing, malware, whatever, monkeypox domains. So I haven't heard anything. So let's go look. Am I just not paying attention, maybe? So the timeline here, first U.S. cases were back in May. It's still officially a health emergency, not an official pandemic. There are people in the public health space that are saying it should be a pandemic, but that's their arguments back and forth. But in my mind, this is still a good comparative for what happened during COVID-19 because it's new, relatively speaking. It's exotic. It's dangerous, right? And so, yeah, so what do we have going on? So I went back to June 1st. So this is 4 months, right? June, July, August, September. In our global traffic logs, there are a total of 196 domains or subdomains that contain monkeypox as text. And it breaks down like this. 62 of those, so almost a third, have either already been in the system or have been put in our system as benign in our judgment. Only 4 and 17 lean shady and definitely look shady. So it's about a 3-to-1 ratio of benign to malicious, or benign to shady, which is much more benign than the COVID world was, and it's also a whole lot less in terms of sheer number, right? So both in terms of overall volume and in the ratio, the monkeypox domain world is much less shady than COVID was. And of the 113 that are not categorized, 16 don't even resolve. Okay, they're obviously typos where somebody typed in monkeypox dot something, and it may not even have been meant as a domain name, but it shows up in the traffic because it looks like it's a valid domain name. It just doesn't exist. Another 25 or more are placeholders, so a good third of the uncategorized are the same kinds of, like, no, there's nothing to see here at all. So I don't know, is this just pandemic fatigue? That's why we don't have more monkeypox domains running around. There's less appetite from the domain squatters to try to get rich with the right monkeypox domain name versus the right COVID-19 domain name, just because they learned the last time around that, no, you're not going to make your fortune selling a disease-related domain name. Or we just all have pandemic fatigue? I don't know, but that's not a lot of threat from the monkeypox world. That's the whole talk. You can go get lunch now if you have questions. I'm happy to answer that. But thank you for coming.